Hello everyone! It is officially that time of the semester and the year where we are finally transitioning from horrible, cold, dark, gloomy winter weather into beautiful, warmer, sunnier spring days with longer hours of light. Spring and summer weather are just around the corner, but so are exams.
No.
With exam season very quickly approaching, I thought it would be an opportune time to make a video sharing some tips and general pieces of advice to help you get through your law school exams. Reflect on the major themes of the course. And what I mean by this is actually sitting there, going through your course outline one more time, and actually writing out what the major points of this course were. What were the major themes and topics that you constantly talked about with your professor and things that you learned about, and make sure to highlight big cases and what principles those cases stood for. I find by reflecting on the major themes and topics and cases of a course also helps me to be able to actually anticipate questions and different fact scenarios I could get on a final. A typical law school exam will usually have fact pattern questions where you're meant to apply case law and legislation and other principles that you've learned throughout the course to that specific scenario. But there are also essay type questions, which are more like policy type questions. And by giving yourself a little bit of a review of the course in this way, it can help you anticipate what those policy questions can be. The three really key things that I like to highlight in this stage of my preparation is the key themes of the course, key case law, like the big cases that you learned, because we read a lot of cases in every course and there's no possible way that you could be examined on every single case that you read. So that's why it's important to sit there and think about what the really big cases were and what principles those cases stood for. By doing all of this, you're kind of helping narrow down what can be expected on the exam, and it'll really help to inform the rest of your studying and preparations. The best way to take advantage of an open book exam is to make sure your notes are the best possible notes that they can be going into that final. Now, it's hard to kind of determine what the best way of taking notes are, or at least I don't think there's one way for me to sit here and tell you this is how you should be structuring your notes, because I think everybody writes their notes differently in a way that makes sense to them, and that's what you should do. And in an exam setting, it's a huge time crunch, right? You don't have a lot of time to write that final, and so you have to make sure that your notes are supposed to be more of a reference point. They're not really meant for you to be reading and studying during the final. It's meant to be more of a guide to help you recall case law or an important concept or steps to determining a certain issue. So because of that, it's really important that your notes are organized in whatever way makes sense to you, but it has to be organized. So yeah, keep it organized, keep it easy to locate, color code, bold, underline, highlight, whatever it is. Just make sure your notes are simple and easy to understand, and it won't take you excessive time to reference something during your final, because you want to make sure you have the most efficient writing process during that time that you're sitting there writing your exam. As important as it is to have really good notes and well-structured notes for your open book law final, it is even more important to actually understand and know the material that are in those notes. Now, this is where it really depends on how you study and retain information best. So whether that's studying by yourself, speaking out loud to yourself, studying in a group and having a conversation and asking questions with your other classmates, talking to somebody like a family member or a friend outside of law school to try to explain concepts to them in a simplified way, using cue cards, drawing diagrams even for some courses, whatever helps keep that information in your brain so you understand it to the best of your ability. Have some sort of a study schedule, especially when you have multiple exams to try and manage your studying for. It's really, really, really important that you have a study schedule so you can allocate the right amount of time to every course and make sure that you're not overstudying or understudying for any of your classes. In my first semester of law school, one of my professors actually gave us a tip that you should always study for your last exam first, because by the time you get to your last exam, you're so burnt out and exhausted from studying and writing all those other exams that you usually tend to do worst on that last exam. And I actually found that to make sense. And so I try my best to make sure I study a good amount for my last exam ever since she gave me that tip back in first year. But of course, like, to each their own. You might have certain courses where you know you're struggling with more and need to allocate more time to those courses than others. So definitely do whatever is most applicable to you. The key thing with your study schedule is taking the time to sit down and prioritize which courses require the most of your attention and which courses you might be maybe a little bit more prepared for, and perhaps you already have your notes figured out for some classes better than others. The most important tip, and I know it's likely going to be the least used piece of advice, but take breaks. I'm also guilty of just making exams my life and being entirely consumed with studying during that period, and it makes sense, but I have been a lot better at making sure I'm taking the breaks that I need, because I know if I don't take breaks, it's a surefire way to get burnt out and not effectively study. And that's where your study schedule really comes in handy, because if you're properly allocating your time and blocking off amounts of time for when you're going to be studying and when you're going to be taking breaks, you won't be overworking yourself, and you'll make sure that you're studying in the right headspace, which is super, super important. Those are all the tips and pieces of advice that I have to share with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you